In America, we believe in pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. But what if you don't have boots? The close to 600,000 people who sleep in streets, under freeways, in parks, and in cars every night in our country, those deemed homeless, are often told that they need to get it together, get off drugs and alcohol, get a job, and be held accountable for their lack of housing. But are these the real reasons we are experiencing record homelessness and an overrepresentation of people of color on the streets across America? Today, we are getting answers, all coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
Homelessness impacts all of us, whether we experience it or not. It's a public health issue, it's an economic issue, and most importantly, it's a human tragedy. For years and even today, homelessness has disproportionately impacted African Americans and people of color. And while California is known for its sunshine and palm trees, it is also home to the largest number of people, 161,000, who experience homelessness on a daily basis. A federal judge recently ordered Los Angeles, California, to offer housing to its Skid Row population by October of this year. The judge blasted the city for failing to address its homeless population and ignoring the dignity and humanity of its unhoused citizens. That federal judge is not the only one who's fed up. Housing advocates are frustrated and say that America's approach to homelessness is seriously flawed, ignores decades of institutional racism, and lacks the kind of leadership that gets results. Well, we're talking to the experts today. And here for my leadoff panel is Dr. Raphael Sonenshein. He is the executive director of the Pat Brown Institute for Public Affairs at Cal State LA. Good morning and welcome, Dr. Sonenshein. And I know you want me to refer to you as Rafi for this.
Actually, Rafe, if you don't mind.
Oh, Rafi, okay.
Rafe, just Rafe is just fine. Thanks.
Just Rafe. Okay, good morning, Rafe. We'll start
nice, again. Nice to see you this morning. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. It's kind of hard to think about California, the sixth largest economy, in the world. And we think about this $70 billion plus surplus that the state has. Yet we have the largest homelessness population, the largest number of people who are unhoused in the country are right here in the state of California. Help us wrap our brains around a state that's so rich, yet we have so many people who go without shelter every night.
It actually makes a lot of sense in a way. The three biggest places for homeless and unhoused people in the country are New York City, Los Angeles, and Seattle. Three very prosperous communities. But the greater the prosperity of an urban area, the greater the distance and inequities between those at the top and those in working class communities of color, often whom are denied housing options, job options, are hurt by the incarceration system, even the adoption system. People are flowing into the system faster than people in LA can get them into housing. So oddly enough, the city and county are getting more and more people into housing, but the overall numbers keep going up because new people are coming up, driven by these multiple systems, including even mental health, as you were indicating.
Well, you know that this federal judge recently issued an order mandating that the city and county of Los Angeles act now. And this judge wasn't too pleased. It's like a 110-page order. We've seen this judge, if you live in Los Angeles and you watch the local news, you've seen this judge actually out touring homeless encampments and walking on Skid Row with elected officials and trying to, in a way that you don't typically see judges do, get his own firsthand experience with what it's like to be homeless in a city, as you said, that is so wealthy. And he was pretty scathing in his, opinion about how the government in this city and county have handled homelessness. What do you make of that judge's order? Do you agree with him, or do you think he was too harsh?
Well, it's hard to say. His analysis is pretty correct. There's plenty of evidence that it's a catastrophe and that if you don't have a sense of urgency and rage about it, nothing is going to change. There's a lot of disagreement about whether it should be just limited to Skid Row and whether he has the right solutions. But he's throwing something into the system that's going to shake loose a lot of things. Because at the end of the day, what I've discovered in my work on this too is you have to start with a sense of moral passion and urgency that this is not just some policy problem. This is, as you said at the top of the program, this is a human tragedy. These are people. And it's easy to forget that in looking at the numbers. And I think that's what he's bringing to the table. I think it's going to cause a lot of good things to happen. And maybe it'll help the proposal we're working on get some traction because it may be a solution to some of the things the judge is talking about.
One of the things he did was in this order, he gave a concrete deadline. He said October. He didn't say next year. He didn't say 5 years from now. He said October of 2021. He wants to see over 4,000 people that live on the streets in Skid Row, which is this part of downtown Los Angeles. He wants to see those people housed. Now, he doesn't define what that housing has to look like. And I know there's been an appeal, that's been filed by the city challenging the judge's order, so it's tied up in litigation. But let's assume the appellate court agrees with this district court judge and says the judge got it right. City of LA, get your act together, get these people housed by October. Is that even humanly possible?
It may be humanly possible. One of the problems we have in this gigantic megalopolis we're in is that if you solve that problem there, it may not solve the rest of the problem. And it may take resources from other problems. So I think the city and county are going to come back to the judge, and I think this might be a good outcome, and say, hey, we may not be able to do it that way on that timeline, but you've moved us, and we're going to do it this way by moving resources here and there. But we don't want to abandon all the things we're doing now in order to meet that deadline, because that wouldn't be effective. That's the kind of dialogue they're going to have with the judge. And I think that may be where this goes. Sometimes when you shake things up, you shake things loose.
Yeah, I want to ask you, I started the program talking about this. This is not a you versus them problem. This is our problem. Everybody is impacted by homelessness, whether you experience it or not. And the reality of that is that, the Skid Row area we're talking about in downtown Los Angeles used to be, the largest concentration of homeless people. But homelessness is everywhere in Los Angeles. It's on the west side. It's in Beverly Hills. It's in Brentwood. It's in, affluent neighborhoods. It's in lower income neighborhoods where literally you'll see people just stop in the middle of a street, a residential street or a street where commercial businesses, and pitch a tent. And, that becomes their home. And what we've seen is this back and forth between policing, whether the police have the legal right to go in and do a sweep, remove those encampments, clean up the area. What do you think is the right approach to that? Because it seems that the approach by the city is constantly changing.
It's a bigger question here. We have so many multiple approaches going on in Los Angeles right now from so many different perspectives, so many different leaders going here or there. We need to get all these folks in the room together. The people who say you should have the right to stay on the street no matter what, the people who say get rid of the encampments no matter what, and the people who say only move the encampments out when people have housing. We can't pursue three policies all at once. And one of the things we're proposing is to create a center where we can now hash out a strategy that we can all live with. So we have a battle plan that everybody can put their weight behind. Amazingly enough, we don't have that in Los Angeles right now. We have like 20 battle plans in different parts of the city. And the days when you could solve it just in Skid Row, that would have been possible 20 years ago when it was basically a Skid Row issue. Now, as you say, it's everywhere. And as everywhere, it's an everywhere problem that we're all going to have to pull our weight around.
Rafe, I think about money. So if you live in a city like Los Angeles, and this could be any city across this country, you look at the kind of money that has been already spent and that is being proposed. We know that there's money coming down from the federal government in the COVID relief bill to address housing. In the state of California, our governor just announced like a $12 billion spend he's going to make. We know the mayor of Los Angeles announced $1 billion. So it sounds like a lot of money. But help us understand, are these numbers even large enough when you talk about 161,000 people in the state of California 50,000 or more of those in Los Angeles County. Are the numbers we're talking $12 billion, $1 billion? Is that just a drop in the bucket in terms of what's needed to make this problem, less daunting?
It's not a drop in the bucket, but it's not enough because really homelessness is created by the lack of a safety net in our society that we've been eroding probably for 40 years now. And it was like something that just kept happening year after year and nobody realized what it was doing. It started as frayed and now it's torn. You really have to rebuild the safety net, which is everything from medical care to housing to economic employment, to make sure people have enough income in their pockets. Make sure that if they do have money for housing, that they're not going to face discrimination when they go to get the housing. So you have to really put a lot of money into the society to make it work, because there is enough money probably to keep moving people out into housing, but there's not enough money to keep people when the rent is due, after all the moratoria are over, from falling into homelessness. Don't forget, the taxpayers also put a lot of money into homelessness in LA County five years ago. And what worries a lot of people in LA is if we don't start getting some visible results soon. You know how the voters are. The voters feel that once we've put money in, it should be over by late tomorrow afternoon, let alone 5 years. And the eye test is that it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And at some point, we have to go back to the voters and say, can you give us a little bit more time? We got to move now. Got to make some progress now.
Yeah, you're talking about that measure that was Measure H, passed 5 years ago. So are you talking about Measure H?
There were actually two measures. The city voters passed HHH to build affordable housing, and county voters passed H to provide money that basically goes to services and other things. Remember, you need both housing and services to address homelessness. The problem in LA, of course, is that the city and county are not on the same page and never have been. So you got the housing coming one place, the services another place. Smaller cities don't have that problem. Cities that are combined city-county don't have that problem. LA's just got to work around our crazy governance structure, but we can't wait. We've got to find a quicker way to get things done.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Measure H in particular, $330 million a year over a 10-year period. And then, as you said, HHH is the money that was allotted to actually build the housing. And then the H money, the Measure H money, was meant to go for mental health services and other wraparound services. And you're right. People I talk to, everyday people on the streets, there's a sense that where is all of that money? We passed these measures. We've agreed to greater taxation to address this problem. But everywhere I drive, everywhere I go, everywhere I walk, every beach, every park, every community I go to, there are, literally hundreds and hundreds of these encampments. So the sense amongst everyday people is that nothing is being done and that this is more government waste, more government, perhaps even fraud, but definitely waste. How are you going to convince people to give the government more time when there's already the sense that you've had enough time and enough money?
Well, the Committee for Greater LA that brought me in to do this study, we're committed to create a place that gives you the good news and the bad news all in one place. We don't even know for sure how many unhoused people there are because the data is so separated in so many different places. We want to bring that into one place, create a mission and a battle plan, but tell people when we're winning and when we're losing. Voters aren't fools. They can tell when they're getting press conference after press conference saying, oh my God, today's a great day. We did this and that. And then somebody else has a press conference a few days later. That does not build credibility. In the absence of credibility, voters will not believe in you. It's flat out. There's no question about that. And don't forget, it's not only the voters, it's also the people who are unhoused themselves, who I had the opportunity in my study to have conversations with. They want to make sure we see them in this process, and they're not just processed through as numbers, which is an easy thing to get into thinking of people as numbers. And I learned a lot in this about racial inequity in terms of how we communicate with different communities about their situation. So it's a matter of having the city get to know what homelessness really is, but they also have to have faith that we're on a path to addressing it.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more, Rafe, about this study and the findings of the study. I know that there's a plan now of a new agency that would bring together, as you said, all these disparate parts to try to create, one, I guess, clearinghouse where all this information can be processed and ideals can percolate.
Well, because you have guests on the program who are homelessness experts, I want to indicate that they brought me in not as a homelessness expert, but as a governance expert. Fresh set of eyes, which was a very interesting way to go about it. And I looked at all the fanciest ways to do it, a big agency, a state agency, gang up all the elected officials in one place, give them all the power, and it turned out it would take too long and it wouldn't really change the situation. So we proposed something quite different, something called the center, because there's no center for homelessness in Los Angeles policy. No center, no place to go to. It would help create a single mission, a battle plan, what I call the road to Berlin, because I'm a big fan of D-Day. So I think about the road to Berlin, and give us measurable outcomes along the way of how we're doing. One of which, by the way, is how are we doing on racial inequity along the way. It's not just a broad numbers, but how are we doing for communities and with communities of color? Report to the community, but hold everybody in town accountable. We don't want to fix all the governance structures that have problems in LA, but we want to fix their eyes on a goal, a mission. We will set up very quickly. It's going to be non-bureaucratic. It's going to have a CEO, a governing board co-chaired by the mayor and the chair of the county board of supervisors, and an oversight committee of some of the most important, very diverse, new and existing leadership in the community, to keep an eye on them, but to know that at the end of the day, the elected officials have to deliver. That's where all the resources are. So this is meant to be a strategic body that for once will fill the missing hole in the center of homelessness policy. Those of you in other cities around the country aren't used to seeing a place this big with no center. You know, people make fun of LA, but when it comes to homelessness, it's not funny anymore, because the lack of a center means you can't take action in a coordinated fashion. Everybody's on their own.
Well, let me ask you a couple of questions, Ray. One, does this replace the Los Angeles Housing Service Authority, that body that's already acting to address homelessness in LA?
And it does not. And when I started the process, I said that would probably be the easiest thing to do, is just fix LAHSA, which everybody in town tries to fix LAHSA. It's a housing authority set up by the city and county through a joint powers agreement in 1993. But it has never had the freedom to do what we propose the center would do, to pay attention to all the inflow questions like incarceration, mental health, adoption, all of those issues, to cast a wide net. And they're subject to the control of the county and the city. So some days the city says, go clear out an encampment. Then the county says, go do something else. Then a week later, the judge says, get everybody out from under the freeways. So they're kind of like this. We think that by having a bigger center with a broader mission, and I think LAHSA feels the same way, we can help them much more than by trying to compete with them as a service provider, which they are, fix them, or just give them a hard time the way everybody else in town does. They get the blame from everybody.
So to be clear, LAHSA will remain in place. The center operates independently of LAHSA. Who's in charge, though, at the center? Like, who has...
Good question.
CEO, and there's some governing bodies.
Yep. Happy to explain that, because it's not going to sit between the city and county the way LAHSA does, which feels like a little delicatessen between two skyscrapers. We're not going to be like that. The center will be independent, but it will be very tightly led by elected officials, the mayor, the chair of the supervisors, a representative of the governor's office. The CEO will sit on the board, and there'll be representatives of a couple of the cities in LA County that have large unhoused populations. And then an oversight board, which very often will bring ideas and plans to the governing board. We don't expect the mayor and the chair of the supervisors to come up with a plan for everybody. We expect them to approve, edit, modify, and implement a plan. It'll probably get developed in the oversight board with a strong CEO who is protected by those two boards. At the end of the day, we think this surrounding the CEO with the collective leadership of the community, both elected officials and community leaders, and unhoused individuals, present and former, who would be on the oversight board, would essentially be the voice of the community. And I think it can fairly quickly develop that battle plan, communicate it to the community and with the community, and then we roll. Then it just goes from there. Yeah. I'm very optimistic and confident that because we're filling a function that's not being done, which is the center of the system, we're getting a lot of great feedback that it's about time somebody did that.
When do you expect this new plan to go into action?
Very soon. I expect in the next few months that the Committee for Greater LA, which is in the lead on this, will be working to implement it. They're already underway. They're already talking to the key elected officials. We've gotten endorsements from the mayor, the chair of the county supervisors, the chair of the Homelessness Committee, Mark Ridley Thomas, has already written in support of it. So we're trying to build a storm behind it.
Well, I look forward to having you back, Rafe, a couple of months from now. Once the center is up, operational, a CEO has been selected, this oversight committee has been developed. To just hear, I have like 5 million questions I could ask you. It would take this hour and several more hours. So obviously, I'm not going to do that today. But I'm going to write those questions down.
Anytime.
Follow the media. I'm going to follow what happens with the development of the center, and then I'm going to have you back and ask you not all 5 million of those questions, but ask some questions.
I would love it. Thank you for inviting me.
But thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being a leader on this really important issue. And I'm pulling for you and for this new center, because obviously it's well overdue, well past time that we address not just Black and brown populations, but all populations who are experiencing homelessness in the richest state in this country. So again, thank you for your work, Dr. Sonenshein.
I thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. All right. You just heard an innovative plan that California is rolling out. Now, I do want to bring on some housing experts. My next guest is Donald Whitehead. He is formerly a person that has experienced homelessness, so he knows firsthand what the trials and challenges are. And he's now the executive director of the National Coalition for the Homeless. Good morning and welcome, Donald.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Well, I want to talk to you about the center, and I want to talk to you about what California is doing. But before we do, I want to talk with you about your own personal experiences, because one thing that Rafe said was that having people who have experienced homelessness, both currently and in the past, are going to be a part of this new governing body. So can you just share with us a little about your own personal experience with homelessness?
Sure. I experienced homelessness in the mid-90s, and my experience was due to a battle with substance abuse. And I went to a program that also had community service aspects to it. And in that program, I was able to not only address the substance abuse, but also become connected with the wider community that provided services to the homeless. One component of the program was actually community service, and that was 25 plus years ago. And I've been doing this work ever since, in pretty much every service sector program level, from outreach worker to case management to program management to executive director, and a number of advocacy positions.
Okay. So having, one, experienced homelessness yourself, and now having worked in pretty much every aspect of homelessness, what are folks missing? What are the experts getting wrong that is causing us to see this continued increase in our numbers?
I think your previous guest really laid out some important underlying causes in Los Angeles, and those same underlying causes are issues that prevent us from solving homelessness at the national level. So most people would be surprised that African Americans, well, probably not. Black and brown people are overrepresented in a unfathomable way. So if you look at the general population of African Americans, the homeless population, it's 3 to 1. So 3 times as many African Americans as you would find in the general population. For Native Americans, it's actually 6 to 1 in most communities across the country and nationally. The other thing is that the reasons that we have so much homelessness among people of color date back to the 1930s. Many people know about redlining, the intentional marginalization of people of color that became a practice that was legitimized in our country, and it was actually perpetrated by the federal government. At the same time, we also had public housing, which was separated by race, separated people from their jobs. And so those issues continue to have an impact today. Just recently, we had the foreclosure crisis. Those red line communities were actually targeted. Just 2 days ago, we saw a person go through the appraisal process herself and get an appraisal later with a white friend that almost doubled the appraisal. So these issues have not gone away. And one of the issues with the money that LA has to provide housing is we still have some of the same issues. Zoning laws were laws that were started after Reconstruction in this country. And that was a way to keep the people in the Great Migration from being able to be housed around their white neighbors. And we still see zoning laws. They're masked today. So you have single family communities, and you can't put multi-family housing in there. And that's just a veiled way of saying we don't want people of color in our communities, so we're going to put this zoning law in place. So I'll stop there, but there's also so many other things. The largest growing portion of the population is women and children.
Wow.
And he talked about the housing cost and poverty. Those are the two biggest reasons people are homeless. Some people will talk about addiction and mental health. Those are certainly reasons that people get to the point where they're homeless, but they're not the cause of homeless. A lot of people are in boardrooms with substance abuse issues or mental health issues. The reason is we don't have enough affordable housing in this country.
And talk about COVID, because we're talking about disproportionality. We're talking about African Americans being overrepresented in homelessness, and we know African Americans are overrepresented in terms of COVID infections and death. And so, how has COVID-19 impacted homeless populations around the country?
Again, Black and brown people have been overrepresented in the infections, incredibly overrepresented in the number of deaths. And the Black and brown people, as well as Native American people, have been completely disproportionately affected. And it all stems back to historical discrimination to Black and brown people. So when those communities were redlined, some of the things that disappeared from those communities were hospitals and jobs and banks. And so people of color, Black and brown people, rely on those jobs that put them in direct danger with people who might be infected. So they have to work at frontline service sector, low wage jobs that continuously put them in contact with people that may cause them to become infected. You also have the lack of resources in those red line communities. You don't have hospitals, so people have to travel to find medical resources. They don't have healthy diets. I mean, so disease and lifespan are shortened in those communities simply because many years ago, back in the 1930s, redlining and intentional segregation happened in those communities, and that has played out in this. We've uncovered the real impact of health disparities in this country, and it couldn't be any more blatant when we see the level of disease and death among our population.
Yeah, I want to bring into the conversation now Leroy Moore. He is a disability rights advocate and founding member of National Black Disability Coalition. Because when we talk about homeless populations, we also have to talk about individuals with disabilities who make up about 17% of the homeless population across the country. Good morning, Leroy, and welcome back to the program. So glad to see you again.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Leroy, help us understand some of the unique challenges that people with disabilities who are homeless face.
Well, if you look outside of any city, any big city, you will see disabled elders. So we're really kicking out our disabled grandparents. And the reason why you see that is that America doesn't really deal with people that get older, because America only deals with people that have a 9-to-5 job. So if you retire, especially now because of the gig economy, there's no retirement. You can't retire driving Uber because there's no retirement. So that right there increases the number of elderly, disabled populations on the streets. Plus, you get nursing homes and hospitals that continue to dump elderly, disabled people on the streets. So I've been researching this since the 90s in LA, San Francisco, all over, and it's still happening. So you have that situation. On the federal level, under Obama, we had the RAD program, and people thought the RAD program was a safety net. No, the RAD program put public housing up on the market and flipped it into regular market housing. So because of this program, it has stripped housing authority. You get a Section 8 voucher now. It's a joke because people don't take Section 8, and there's no Section 8 apartments going around. So, in another thing is that the RAD program, Donald Trump liked it so much that he took it from Obama and flipped it and made it even bigger. So we need to repeal the RAD program because it's killing public housing as it is.
And I'll go back to you, talking about, Don, I want to talk about, Leroy's talking about public housing and Section 8, and obviously affordable housing and the lack thereof, and the inability for people who need a Section 8 voucher to even access them. There are long waiting lists all over the country for those vouchers. And now we have this federal moratorium on evictions that's been in place because of COVID-19 that's about to expire. It's set to expire on June 30th. And that means that people who have not paid their rent are now going to be responsible for the entirety of those missed rental payments. What is that going to do to the homeless population? Are we expecting to see thousands and thousands of families who will be out on the streets as a result of the expiration of these moratoriums?
I think the number may be reduced. So to their credit, there have been some additional resources that have been developed through the CARES Act and through the American Rescue Plan. In just a few days, the Department of Housing and Urban Development is going to release $35 billion for emergency housing vouchers. And those will be Section 8 vouchers that will be released through the Public Housing Administration. Now, at the height of COVID, economists were predicting about a 45% increase in homelessness due to evictions. We will see quite a tsunami of people being evicted. It's already started, by the way. And then there's this. So in addition, I thank Leroy for talking about RAD. Were you about to say something, Leroy? I hope I didn't interrupt you.
No. Okay.
Well, I was going to say, in addition to the RAD program, there's a Faircloth Amendment. So the Faircloth Amendment eliminates the increase in dollars to public housing. So what's resulted from that is repairs to public housing. They're probably about $90 billion behind. And there hasn't been any new public housing development. So what we need to do to address the issue is production. So we need more public housing. We propose a entitlement, so Section 8 as an entitlement. So anybody who is eligible for Section 8 should get that. The administration has asked for 200,000 more vouchers. That's a really good start, but it's not nearly enough. As you
What's the
say,
number that we need, Donald? How many vouchers do we need?
I think probably the gap in affordable housing in this country is more like we probably need another 6 million units, maybe 7 million,
So we need
in
7
order to.
million units, and you would say 7 million vouchers?
I would say somewhere in that neighborhood. If we are going to, we need 7 million units produced either by vouchers, by additional public housing, by the National Affordable Housing Trust, another vehicle for production. So we need that many units to bridge the gap, because right now we know that at least 7 million people are living either on the verge of eviction because they're rent burdened,
Right.
or they're already on their way out. So we need to bridge that gap. And what your first guest talked about the cost, but what people have to understand that if we house people, we actually have cost benefits. So there's a trade-off there. We're spending money for people to be arrested, for people to go to the emergency room. All these dollars are being spent on people while they're out on the street. If you put people in housing, those numbers go down. So that reduces those extra costs that are being spent on homeless people because they're living outside. And if I could make one more point about people living outside, it is very dangerous for someone to live in a tent in any community in the country, especially women. I had a woman on my podcast the other day that talked about being raped on a daily basis because she was out in an encampment. It's morally reprehensible for the richest country in the history of the world to have people living on the sidewalks of our major cities.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to say that vouchers are one thing. Matter of fact, I'm about to transfer my voucher to LA. I'm about to go to UCLA for the PhD program. When I called LA, they said, "Oh, we don't take transfer vouchers." So so that we can have 10 billion vouchers. It doesn't matter. The thing that we need to do is to think outside of the box. And here in the Bay Area, Poor Magazine has built what's called Homefulness. And they get no grants, no funding. They're building Homefulness for zero income people and up. And they have a law that's going to the city to make poor people eligible to build their own housing. That's the kind of thinking that we need. You don't need thinking about more vouchers and all that stuff, because we see that it doesn't work. We had Ben Carson as the Secretary of Housing. He had no clue about housing. The thing about HUD is that HUD never ever was fully funded and fully enforced since
Leroy,
the beginning.
I'll stop you there. What you're saying is critically important, and I'm glad, because now we get two different perspectives. Donald says we need.
No, we don't have different perspectives.
Oh, okay. I thought you said we need vouchers, and Leroy said we're done with vouchers. We need a new creative approach to this. But
no, well, then we do disagree, because I think that one of the biggest, the two biggest reasons for homelessness are this: we don't have enough affordable housing. And so we have to develop the housing. The other end of the spectrum, as Leroy started to talk about, is poverty. The housing that we do. Okay.
I know it's such an important topic. It's really big, but I got to ask this last question. I'm running out of time. And this is, we've been having this great conversation about the macro level, how we address homelessness. But on an everyday basis, all of us are going to encounter someone that's homeless, someone that's holding a sign, someone that's holding a can. Help us understand what we can do as everyday people to best help people that we see on the streets of our country. Should we be calling, the police? Should we be calling a housing authority? Should we be calling, who should we call, if we should call anyone? Should we be giving them money? Just simple questions like that. I got about 30 seconds, so Donald, help me out.
So that is not as simple a question as you would think. I say use your sphere of influence. Everybody has a sphere of influence. If we want to do the big picture, we volunteer. We volunteer at a place where it's safe, because it's not safe to pull out money on the street, whoever you're talking to. So I say give to a shelter or give to a community-based program. But the other thing you can do is change the dynamic from the big picture standpoint. Talk to your congressman, talk to your local elected official about really addressing the needs. Because Leroy made one other important point. We have never addressed homelessness in a comprehensive way. We've piecemealed this program or this need over and over again, and we will never end homelessness unless we do it in a comprehensive way.
Quick question. I know you said don't pull out money on the street. It can be dangerous. Should we be giving food to people?
Yes, I do that myself. I do what I call random acts of kindness. Okay. I carry gift cards, and I will pass them out. If somebody's hungry, I'll give them a gift card for McDonald's or wherever that's in close proximity. I do that once a week.
All right, Leroy, you get the last word. I'm sorry, I'm running out of time. Leroy, quickly.
Yeah, we need more than charity. You know, I just gave you an example. Homelessness, Poor Magazine in Oakland. You know, the picture of homelessness in New York. The Poor People's Army in Philly. These organizations are on the ground doing the work. These organizations need your support. You know, getting.
Got to leave it there, Leroy. I'm so sorry. We're going to post about those organizations that you just identified. We'll post those on our social media sites. I want to thank you so much, Donald. Thank you, Leroy. It's such a big topic. Obviously, you know, we can't do justice in the time that we have, but we'll have you both back to continue this conversation. And thank you again for your voices and the work that you're doing on this really critical issue.
And thank you for having us.
Thank you, Donald.
Real big issue, lots of voices. We're talking to the experts today, and my next guest has been working in the field of homelessness for over 20 years. His name is Jeff Olivet. He is the co-founder of Racial Equity Partners.
Actually,
Welcome,
we're
Jeff.
Partners together.
I know that your work is focused on racial justice, and you know, as we all know, and we've been talking about earlier in the show, people of color in particular are overrepresented in the homeless population. What role do you think race is playing as policymakers are grappling with solutions to this, you know, growing homelessness problem that's happening really across the country?
Areva, structural racism is a root cause of homelessness. And you know, there's often been this myth that homelessness is colorblind and that it could happen to anyone. And certainly there are people of all racial identities who experience homelessness and who are living in poverty and living on the edge. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted all people, but we also know that those most likely to experience the public health fallout from COVID, the economic fallout from COVID, loss of job, loss of home, are predominantly people of color, particularly African American and Latino. The same is true in homelessness. So homelessness actually does discriminate by race, and structural racism has been a driver of that for decades. If we don't recognize that in our analysis of homelessness, we're never going to get the policy solutions right.
But do you see that happening? I guess that's what I'm grappling with. I think the evidence is clear. Experts have, you know, been very clear about the role of systemic racism in, you know, homelessness as a national issue. But are you seeing the policymakers take that into consideration, that structural racism, as they try to craft policies?
I think the policymakers and the general public have been slow to come to that analysis and slow to come to the policy solutions. So the myths perpetuate that homelessness is about poor choices at the individual level or mental illness or substance use. And all those things can certainly be factors that are kind of mixed in with people's homelessness, but they are not the drivers of homelessness. The drivers of homelessness are structural. And the policymakers, I believe, at the local, state, and federal level have made the mistake of trying to think about homelessness as an individual failing rather than as a societal, structural policy failing. So no, I think to answer your question, we're not there yet with legislation. We're not there yet with funding. We're not there yet with policy priorities that create structural solutions to a structural problem.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned this approach that policymakers continue to take in this notion that homelessness is an individual problem. And there's so many myths about homelessness, and I wanted to take some time during this interview to really debunk some of the common myths about homelessness. There are probably 10 or 12 or so that I found on the internet, but I want to focus on a couple that I think get played over and over again and that many people have bought into. The first one is that most homeless people are suffering from some kind of chronic mental illness. Help us understand whether that's fact or fiction.
Sure. I think it's a mixed picture. Certainly, many people experience homelessness are also experiencing a mental health issue, but by no means the majority. And so, to say that all homeless folks are mentally ill is just simply not true. That is fiction. When you look at the overall homeless population, we're not just talking about visibly homeless folks out on the street. We're talking about families with young children. We're talking about youth and young adults. We're talking about seniors. So when you look at the population as a whole, it's not homogenous at all. It's not the stereotype that you see, standing by the side of the road with a cardboard sign. Certainly, mental illness can both play into people's homelessness and be exacerbated by homelessness. Homelessness can make mental health problems worse. But we also know that there are plenty of people with serious mental illness who never become homeless. And if you've got the financial wherewithal, if you've got the family support, if you've got access to good medical care and good mental health care, then homelessness is not an inevitable result of mental illness. So while the two are connected, mental illness does not cause homelessness, and the homeless population is not the vast majority mentally ill, like I think the stereotype would hold.
Great. Glad you cleared that up. Jeff, the next myth, again, we hear so frequently is that the majority of people who are homeless are drug addicts or alcoholics. Is that fact or fiction?
I think it's similar. I'm really glad you're going down the line with some of these kind of commonly held beliefs. It's a good way to approach our understanding of homelessness. Similarly, for a lot of people, drug and alcohol issues, addiction can be a factor that plays into their homelessness. People can really struggle to hold a job, to maintain relationships with friends and family, and that complicates the path back to connection and stability. But homelessness is not caused by addiction. It's caused by lack of affordable housing. It's caused by lack of good mental health and substance abuse treatment out there, at least on a scale necessary to meet the need. So while you have a lot of people on the street who have histories of addiction or even current substance use, it's by no means the majority. It's probably somewhere around 35 or 40%. Again, we can get back to that kind of broader picture of homelessness with families and youth and others. We know that substance use can play into that and also be made worse by homelessness, just like mental health issues can. But to think of it as the cause is a misdiagnosis of what we're talking about here.
And I'm glad you keep mentioning children and families, because this is the third myth that we often hear, and that's that homeless people are somehow dangerous and violent.
That's right. And, people, I think, often live in fear as if this is an us-them thing. There are those people out there and we're here and we need to protect our communities from those people, as opposed to seeing the structural failings that caused homelessness have actually let those people down, and those people are also us. We are all, deeply connected as human beings. To your question about violence and fear of violence, people experiencing homelessness are much more likely to be victims of violent crime than perpetrators of violent crime. So, certainly there are violent criminals within the homeless population, just like there would be in the housed population or any other group. But the common experience is one of violent victimization by people who are homeless, not violent perpetration by people experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, I'm glad, again, you're clearing up these myths. Another one that you've alluded to, but I really want you to hit home, is this notion that homeless people have made bad choices, and their bad choices have led to their homelessness. Again, is that primarily fact or fiction?
I know you're the interviewer, so I'm not going to ask you if you've ever made any bad choices. I've certainly made bad choices, and I've never been punished with homelessness for those bad choices. There are plenty of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies who make bad choices. There are elected officials even who make bad choices, right? The result of those bad choices is rarely homelessness for people who have the financial resources to withstand it. So to say that people are homeless because they made bad choices, I think does real harm to our understanding of the barriers that are set in front of people. Of course, people make bad choices. We all make bad choices, but there should be a basic social safety net, and there should be basic access to affordable housing for all people, so that bad choices don't result in homelessness.
Yeah. This is one that I think really people often think and will say is that homeless people, look, they wouldn't be homeless if they would just get a job. Again, help us understand how that's, again, just factually not accurate about that description that homeless people are jobless.
Well, I think the first thing to dispel is that many people experiencing homelessness are working full-time, part-time, living in vehicles, living hand-to-mouth, renting a motel room for a week, and then on the street, living with friends and family, doubled up, tripled up. And that's true across age groups. It's true across racial and ethnic identities and backgrounds and immigration status. Many people experiencing homelessness are working very, very hard every day. Now, are there vast numbers that don't have jobs? Of course. Is that by choice? In my experience working in this field for 25 years, most people I've known who have been homeless want to be working, and there simply either aren't the jobs out there, or their housing instability is creating barriers to getting a job and keeping a job. So without the stability of a place to live, a place to shower, a place to list as your legal residence, you can't even get a job half the time. And if you list the shelter as your address, people will hold that against you. Employers will, landlords will. And so the kind of two-edged sword here is that people who are homeless and working are struggling to maintain those jobs. People who are not working and want to be are having trouble getting the jobs in the first place. So this goes hand in hand with housing in a lot of ways. Housing can provide a stable platform from which employment and reconnection can happen.
Yeah, and this brings me to my last myth that I want you to address, Jeff. And this is this notion that somehow people who live on the streets prefer to live on the streets. Help us understand the fallacy, again, in that belief that many people hold.
Right, that people choose the freewheeling lifestyle. They love being off the grid. They are there by choice. Or you get this one too, where people come to our fair city because of our great shelter system, and that's another myth we can talk about as well. That people want to be here. They either want to be here on the street or they want to be in that community because the services are so great. Neither is true. I've known and worked with and been friends with many thousands of people who have been homeless, and I remember exactly one who said, "I choose to be here," and it was kind of a free spirit type, and I remember him very clearly saying, "Yeah, I choose to be homeless." That's one out of tens of thousands, literally. And even in that case, I wonder if it's to save face. I wonder if it's to not admit failure because of all the stigma we've been talking about the last few minutes, Areva. Yeah. So even if you hear that, even if someone says that, I would take it with a grain of salt. I think people don't choose the brutality of the streets. I think they don't choose the uncertainty and fear of living on the streets or in shelters. I don't think people choose to be beaten or raped on the streets. I don't think people choose to not know where they're going to lay their head tonight. I think that is fundamentally flawed thinking to believe that that's true.
Yeah, so, and I want to ask you this, Jeff. Thank you, first of all, for setting the record straight, because so many of those myths are perpetuated in our society. That, in media, in images that we see on television, on the internet, and people then buy into them and they start to repeat them, and somehow they become true because someone else has repeated it, or it gets repeated a lot of times. So it's important that we provide people with factual information and undermine and debunk some of those common myths about homelessness. Also, something I read, I wanted to get your opinion on, and it was an article in one of the major publications about some anthropologists who have this position that homelessness is a culture. And we should not think of it as a problem, but we should honor and respect that there are these encampments that people create, and inside these encampments, there's shared experiences, and they're like these little ecosystems that are thriving, and that America's approach to homelessness needs to move away from this notion that we have to fix a problem, but we should start thinking about how we honor this culture that's being created in many communities. Do you think that's the right way? I'll just tell you, for me, when I read that, I was thinking, that's somebody sitting in an ivy tower that's never spent a day on the street, that's never experienced racism, that's never experienced, gender bias. So I don't know. And it just struck me that way as a Black woman, that was a very easy way for a white male anthropologist to think about homelessness. But when I think about Black women with kids living on the street, I'm not thinking they're in some, great commune where there are all these wonderful shared experiences. So you're 25 years in the business. Help me understand, am I thinking right about that, or are these anthropologists onto something?
No, I think you're absolutely right. When I think about what's happening in encampments or even in shelters, it's about survival. It is a culture of survival. It is not a culture of, hey, we're all, in this together, and here's my community. Having said that, of course, relationships develop. Of course, community develops. Of course, norms emerge around how an encampment functions and decisions are made and all of that. But to say that that's a culture to be sort of honored and supported is crazy to me. It's back to your question about homelessness by choice, that if people were truly choosing that lifestyle, so to speak, hey, wouldn't it be great to go live in that encampment in Tacoma or Minneapolis or Los Angeles or Oakland? That's not what's happening. And so when people end up in shelter or in an encampment or on the street, it is truly about survival. And those relationships that develop are often very supportive. They're often very much, I've got your back, you've got my back. But it is about getting through this tragedy, this crisis, this catastrophe day by day by day. It's not about the choice to be here and develop this lovely commune. That is simply not what's happening.
And final question for you, Jeff. If you could wave a magic wand, there have been lots of policies implemented. There's been billions and billions of dollars across the country that have been thrown at homelessness, at the federal level, at the local level, but yet, homelessness continues to increase. So if you could wave a magic wand, what do you think that, what would you do? What would be that one solution, if there is that one magical solution that would really start to impact these numbers and drive them down?
Homelessness is a multifaceted failing, and it's got to be a multifaceted solution. So that's one. There's probably not one policy fix. It's a multifaceted set of policy fixes. I don't believe that money has been thrown at homelessness. I think there have been times in our history that was true. I think what we've learned over the last 20 years is some very targeted approaches that work to housing and services and outreach and connection and subsidizing long-term housing for those who need it. So there's a growing evidence base of effective practices. There are a lot of communities that have made great strides in ending veteran homelessness, for example, or really driving down the number of folks experiencing long-term homelessness. But the thing we haven't done is to turn off the faucets. That we've gotten better at bailing the bathtub, and we've seen incredible reductions in a lot of communities of the large numbers of people who are homeless. In other communities, we've seen significant increases. That's driven by new homelessness and our inability to keep up. And so if you look at federal investment in affordable housing, for example, it's been slashed over the last 40 years. It's a fraction of what it used to be. And as that number of affordable housing units has gone down, the availability of affordable housing, the number of homeless folks has gone up, and we've seen that over the last 40 or 50 years. So one magic wand fix would be to create and rehab and support and sustain enough affordable housing to meet the number of people who need it. And that's not only the number of people who are homeless tonight on the streets of the United States, but those who are living right on the edge. And so we're talking about millions of units of affordable housing that are needed. That's one. Two, I think we've got to go hard at structural racism. You and I led off the conversation with this. If we don't address structural racism in criminal justice, healthcare, education, and every other sector, we will never turn off the faucet of people of color moving from jail or prison into homelessness, from foster care into homelessness. And unless you turn off those faucets that are driving high rates of homelessness, particularly for people of color, we will never bail the bathtub fast enough. The last myth I would try to debunk, and this is, I think, implicit in a lot of what you and I have talked about, is that homelessness is inevitable. That's the myth, right? Homelessness is just here with us. It'll be here with us forever. And I fundamentally don't believe that. I think we have within our power, within our resources, within our creativity, the ability to solve homelessness right now if we really chose to, if we made it a priority as a society to say no one who lives in this country should ever be homeless. Not one child, not one young person, not one woman, not one young man, not one transgender person, not one Black person, Indigenous person, Latino person, Asian person, anyone else should ever be homeless. If we made that commitment, we could get there.
And, you know, I'm glad you said that, Jeff, and it does give me some hope. But you and I, both working in the racial justice field, know that that would be a lot easier said if those numbers weren't so Black and so brown. That's the sad
That's right.
part. So that's the really, really frustrating but stark reality of where we find ourselves in 2021. Maybe we'll be at a different place in 2025, but that's where we are. But encouraging to know that we can do it. It's just a matter of will. And I so wholeheartedly agree with you on that, Jeff. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And thank you for speaking truth to power about these really difficult issues of systemic racism. A lot of folks are unwilling to just be honest about it, and we can't fix it if we don't acknowledge it. So thank you for your honesty on this issue as well. Wow, I want to thank all of my guests this morning. What an enlightening topic. Again, unfortunate to hear, but again, we got to talk truth here. And the reality is Black and brown people and Indigenous people are the nation's, biggest homeless populations. And that's just not in Los Angeles. That's not just in California. That's across the country. But the promising news we heard from Jeff, which is that it doesn't have to be that way. And we also heard some great advice from Donald about how we on a micro level can help those people in our community. And if we're afraid to give them money, I love what Donald said about having some gift cards, McDonald's or your local grocery store, because no one should go hungry in this country. And if we have an opportunity to help someone, even with a $10 gift card, I encourage everyone to do that. Additionally, he talked about donating to homeless shelters and nonprofit, another way to do your part as an individual. And of course, on a macro level, it's about policy. It's about changing the way this country addresses homelessness and about addressing those systemic issues that Jeff talked about so powerfully. And just some words to live by before I get out. It's an inescapable, vicious loop, and it's called racism. Despite the harsh reality of homelessness in this country, it is not inevitable. We just heard our guest today state that this problem is not too big or too difficult to solve. It's multifaceted and it's complex, but it's solvable. And that's not just optimistic Areva, the civil rights attorney, saying that. That's experts with over 100 years of collective experience working on homelessness. The experts are clear, they're unequivocal. When policy makers decide that they care enough about people that look like me, people of color, Black and brown people in this country, when they care enough and when they decide that those people deserve and are entitled to land, labor, and lodging, when they decide that Black and brown people are entitled to a roof over their heads to protect themselves from the elements and a door to safeguard their belongings, and that people of all color are entitled to some form of affordable and sustainable housing, guess what? America will no longer have a homelessness problem. But until then, sadly, we will, which is what we do today, blame the victims and stick our heads in the sand about the inescapable, vicious cycle of racism. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. And remember, we are all in this together.
Really good.